last section here on the practice test. Working with square roots, complex numbers, and then the review section, we can go through those as well. Why not? So, complex numbers, don't forget that I is the square root of -1. So I to the 5th, maybe you remember that I to the 4th is the same as 1. I to the 4th is 1. So here we have 1 times I. So this is just I. If you don't have it memorized what I to the 1st was, I squared, I cubed, I to the 4th, you could just work it out. I is square root -1, so this is square root -1 times square root -1 times square root -1 times square root -1 times square root -1. 5 of them. Square root of -1 times square root -1 should give us a -1. Square root of -1 times the square root of -1 gives us a -1. And square root of -1, we call that I. -1 times -1 is a positive 1. And 1 times I is I. So just remember that I is a square root of -1, and you can crunch that out if you don't have those other pieces memorized. On to B. Don't FOIL this one. We have subtraction in the middle. A common mistake is people just start FOILing, and then you end up with too many terms. But this is just subtraction across here. So we really just have 3 plus 2i minus 4 and minus a -I, so plus I. And here we can combine like terms. 3 minus 4 is -1, and 2i plus I is 3i. Another option there is just combining your terms across. 3 minus 4, 2i minus a -I, and that'll get you straight to the same thing. On C, we do have to FOIL. So our firsts gives us -18. Outers gives us plus 12i. Inside gives us plus 12i. And the last gives us a -8i squared. In this we can simplify what is I squared. I squared is a -1. So minus 8 times a -1, this all ends up becoming plus 8 instead. So again, combine like terms, the 18 with the, -18 plus 8 is going to be -10, and then 12i plus 12i plus 24i. Simplifying the square root where we have the fraction. On these, the key step is to multiply by the conjugate. So if we have 3 plus square root of 2, we multiply top and bottom by 3 minus square root of 2. Not 4, square root of 2. And across here we have to distribute and FOIL as well. So on top, when we distribute, we're going to have 12 minus 4 square root of 2. Okay, the 4 gets distributed to both of those pieces. And then in the denominator we have to distribute as well. And we choose the conjugate because it makes things cancel out. So in the denominator, when we FOIL, the first gives us 9. The outside gives us a -3 square root of 2. The insides gives us a positive 3 square root of 2. And the last, so positive square root 2 times negative square root 2 is going to be negative, and square root 2 times square root 2 is 2. And this works out nicely for us because then we have this -3 square root 2 plus 3 square root 2, which cancel each other out. And all we have left on the bottom is 9 minus 2, which is 7. So we have 12 minus 4 square root 2 over 7. And if the bottom was even or had a 2 in there somewhere, we would cancel that out with the top and reduce everything by a 2. actually, let's look at that. Let's pretend we had somehow instead gotten 12 minus 4 square root 2 over 10. We can reduce each of those by a 2, and we would have 6 minus 2 square root 2 over 5. We can't reduce what's inside the square root by a 2. That is stuck inside the square root. We can't really touch that with something that's on the outside. Square root of 8 over 5. This is the same as square root of 8 over square root of 5. And we don't like having the square root in the denominator, so on these we just multiply top and bottom by whatever square root is in the denominator, because on that bottom that gets rid of the square root. So on top we would have square root of 8 times 5, which is 40, and on the bottom square root of 5 times square root of 5 is 5. So from there, all we can do is look for something that might come out of the square root on top. 40 is 4 times 10, so square root of 4 is 2 square root of 10. So this would end up being 2 square root of 10 over 5. So that does it from with all the stuff from chapter 4. Hopefully that helps. We can look at the review real quick. Find the slope of the line. Don't forget slope is just y1 minus y2 over x1 minus x2. We can subtract either order as long as we're consistent. So if we do negative 7 minus 5 on top, then on the bottom we just have to do 2 minus 4. So that spits out a negative 12 over negative 2. Slope there is a positive 6. And then for writing equations of lines with given characteristics, here's a point that we want to go through, so we have some x and y for the line that we want. Parallel lines have the same slope. So the slope that we want is 1/2. So if we look in y equals mx plus b, we have a y, that's negative 7. The slope that we want is 1/2. We have an x, that's 2. But we don't know the y-intercept for our line. So we solve for that y-intercept. Looks like that ends up being a negative 8. So the line that we wanted, we knew it had a slope of 1/2, and then we found the y-intercept to be negative 8. So y equals 1/2 x minus 8 is our solution